So with that, I will hand it over to Jaden. Thank you very much, Jack. So like he said, I'll be covering the early history of Waupun, so we'll get started here. Of course, today we're in the current Waupun Public Library. This was built in 1968, I believe. And a lot of people, of course, may not know when the library was started or how it was started. So that's why I'm going to be answering today. How did the Waupun Library begin? It all began with one man named Edwin Hillyer. You may have heard me talk about him before. We had the Waupun Cemetery Walk, where I portrayed him last year. And I've also posted things on my news page about him because he's such an important figure to Waupun. So I'll be talking about that here today. So to begin, obviously, he is an important figure in Waupun's history. He was an early Waupun industrialist. He was born in Atwater, Ohio in 1825, and he came to Waupun first with his brother in 1847. His brother was Joseph Talcott Hillyer, and they started they worked in lumber for 2 years before Edwin went to California for the gold rush. And in fact, back there we have one of the copies of his gold rush journal, which is the account of when he was traveling to and from the California region. So there's a lot of things that he did, and I haven't listed them all because there's a lot that he was involved in. But basically he was involved in starting several local associations, including several banks and insurance companies. The railway, he was involved in bringing that to Waupun, and he was also involved in starting the Forest Mountain Cemetery Association. And of course, the reason why I'm talking about him is because he was heavily involved in starting the Library Association. So in 1858, there were several citizens in Waupun who wanted to start a library association. About 80 signatures were collected on the original petition, and they petitioned the Justice of the Peace of Wisconsin at the time, John Ware, I believe. And he let them create their organization, and so they came together in February of 1858 to sign the Constitution. About 54 or 55 members signed the Constitution. This is a picture of all the signatures, and we actually have the original ledger in the display case over there, which has the Constitution, the original lettering of it, and the signatures, and the meeting minutes from those times. So as part of the Constitution, of course, talked about the subscription. When they started, it was about $3 a year, and the first year was actually payable in books. So they of course needed a collection, so they said, well, you can get your subscription by donating books you don't want or need. Maybe other people can get some use out of them. And like I said, we do have the original meeting minutes, and of course, those are between 1858 and 1883. That ledger also includes all the catalog and the expenses from that time, which I find really interesting, but you might not. So in the early times of the library, Edwin Hillyer was the library. He was actually librarian for 37 years, the entire time that it was the Library Association. He was chosen as the librarian and the association clerk. When it began, it was the library only had actually 9 feet of shelves, which is to say only 3 shelves long that we have here. I actually measured them when I first read that. I'm like, that is not a lot at all. And so during this time, he was run out of his insurance office. He worked for the Dodge County Mutual Insurance Company. He actually started with a couple other early industrialists in Waupun. And the subscription price, I mean, through these years, it shifted back and forth. There was most years where it was $2, and there was one year that was actually only $1. And right here, of course, is a annual report. This is like a little card. This is like a business card almost of the Dodge County Mutual Insurance Company. It was in 1861. I found this in one of the ledgers, and I was so happy to find it. It's such a cool thing. I love it. And of course, it also has his signature over here. I'd like that detail too. So, of course, the Library Association wasn't without its fair share of troubles. The Library Association actually almost faced dissolution in 1880 due to low interest in the community. And they weren't sure what to do because they didn't have the money to maintain it. So Hillyer proposed that he become the sole proprietor of the collection and the association property, which included some furniture and lamps and whatnot as well. And the association agreed, contingent on keeping the collection open to subscribers, and as long as he added to the collection with 100 volumes every year. Of course, he did keep that. And this right here is just a scan of one of the original pasted things at the beginning of the books that would show that they belonged to the association. So when Hillyer was getting older, he was wanting to make the library more accessible to people in Waupun. He couldn't keep doing it himself, as he had been doing it for quite some time, over 30 years. So he approached the city council, the Waupun City Council, with a proposal to make the library collection free for public use. And unfortunately that didn't happen immediately, but it was something the city was interested in doing. They just didn't have the funds initially to do it. So in 1895, the city council agreed, creating the new library board, and they established the Hillyer Library in honor of his work and giving his collection to the city. And right over here is actually the second ledger that we have, the first page of it, which says the records of the Waupun Public Library, and noting that it was the Hillyer Library at the time. It was, of course, November 1st, 1895 when it happened. So, I gotta breathe. So when the library board was brought on, when they made it a public organization, they immediately set to cataloging the collection, or re-cataloging, I should say, to more modern standards at the time, of course. It has changed quite a bit since then. So the library actually had moved several times throughout its history. And at this time, when it became the public library, they moved it into the Whitting, which eventually became the Davison Theater, which is actually on the block of Main and Carrington Street, which is currently Bent's Automotive. In 1901, the local women's clubs were actually interested in helping the library become a full free public library, and they raised funds to offset the cost to the city that they could make it a fully free library. And of course, during this time as well, the Carnegie Foundation was sent some letters from Waupun to see if they could get some parts of the grant to build a permanent library, which became the Carnegie Library, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And this is just an example of the rules and regulations, little pamphlet we have. I love showing this off too. It's such a neat detail, but you're not going to be able to read it, but it's a bit small, a bit blurry, but there is 23 rules here, and I just find that interesting detail there. Anyway, so in all, Edwin Hillyer served 37 years as Waupun's sole librarian without pay. He served another 13 years on the Waupun Library Board from when it became the public library. And like I said earlier, the library moved 6 times before the Carnegie Library was constructed in 1905, so a total of 7 times now. Or 8 times actually, now that it's moved here. And then this here is just like an example of what the pasted inside would look like during that time period as the Hillyer Library, the Hillyer Public Library right there, and I actually have the book in the back with that showing. Unfortunately, in 1908, Hillyer was getting rather old, and he fell ill in September, and he resigned from his position on the Waupun Library Board. And so he ended up passing away later that year in December in 1908 at the age of 83. And he was buried in Forest Mountain Cemetery. And right there is his gravestone. So his legacy is almost underappreciated today, which is why I talk about him so much. For one, he was so involved with local industry that Waupun would be unrecognizable without his efforts. when it comes to historical documentation, he is the sole voice and a lot of he's the sole source for a lot of these things that we know about early Waupun. And if we didn't have what he had written, we wouldn't know anything at all. For example, when it comes to the Gold Rush Journal, that's just a very interesting experience that he wrote about. And more importantly, the historical sketches, which actually were run in the Waupun Leader News in 1902 and 1903, where he wrote about the early days in Waupun, what they were like for him and for other people, and the major things that happened throughout them. And of course, we got the association notes from the library, which I find personally very interesting. That's what you're here to learn about. And creation of the Waupun Public Library. If we didn't have him, we wouldn't have a library, or at least quite as early as we did. And I really like this quote. This was in the November 1st, 1905 Waupun Leader News. It goes, where this is from Lucius Dwight Hinckley. He was actually on the board of directors for the Waupun Public Library at the time. And he said, "It is but justice to say that from the outset, Mr. Hillyer was the moving spirit in the establishment and maintenance of the library. It is hardly too much to say that it is doubtful if all the other people in town contributed an equal amount of time, energy, and money. It is a question whether the town would not be in possession of the library but for his efforts." And this had been the same month, or the same week, actually, I think, that was the Carnegie Open. And that's pretty much it that I have to say. I'll turn it over to Tracy in a minute. I just want to point out that this map here is the map of Waupun from 1885, and several of the locations that he had the library were in downtown. I believe one was in 321 Main Street here. There was also one in the National Bank of Waupun, which was right next door, I believe. And then the Wedding Theater, of course, used to be right here. And it moved around a lot in the downtown area. So, yeah, like I said, that's all I had to say. I don't know if you want to open up for questions now or later, or?
We'll probably do questions after each section here.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for me?
Did he have other family here?
Yes, he had a very big family, in fact. Oh, I forgot to mention this too. He has, or he had, a golden wedding in 1898, which was a very big affair, and we have about, I think, 30 of his golden wedding books. We had an example brought here as well, and could you bring that up for me quick? Thank you. And it has a variety of poems and information that they had talked about at the wedding, and it was and several pictures.
Don't be careful with it.
And it's just such a wonderful thing. And I look at stuff like this that's more than 100 years old, and none of the people would remember it. There's no one around left. And they lived such fulfilling lives. And it just, I don't know, I feel something. But yeah, there's also some pictures of his family. I'd have to go through it. Maybe you can look through it afterwards. But there are pictures of his family. I don't think any of his family still live in Waupun, unfortunately. But yeah, that's pretty much it there. Any other questions? Nancy?
You know, this isn't a library, but Hillyer, do you know what compelled them to move from Ohio to Waupun?
That's a great question. I don't know specifically. He does talk about the pioneering spirit in some of his writings, so I imagine they just felt like they could make a better life for themselves by doing more industry elsewhere. I don't know why they specifically chose Waupun, if they were just traveling and they just found Waupun, they're like, this is a great place to live, or if they chose it specifically because someone they knew. Unfortunately, we don't know that.
Okay.
I wish I did. That is a question I've actually had myself. You and Beck.
Why do you think they kept having to move the library? Like going to different storefronts that were not rented or something like that?
That's also a great question. I should have been more clear about this. They were actually in the upstairs offices for most of these places. The office or the library rooms were always in the office of Edwin Hillyer. Usually they were open in the evenings after work had been completed for the day. Why they moved specifically, I'm not sure. That's just how it would go. I do wonder about that too. It doesn't say anything specifically about that either. I wish I knew. Any other questions? Yep.
Did they have the publisher of that wedding book? Where would that have been?
Where would it have been printed?
Uh-huh.
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I don't think it says. Probably local, if I had to imagine.
Okay.
We did have some printing houses in
Yeah.
Waupun.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Usually the newspapers, actually.
Yeah.
We contract with the newspapers and they would print it.
Yep.
Alright.
Yep. Any other questions? Mr. Mayor?
How did your fascination with Edwin Hillyer begin?
That's a great question. I would have to say, probably with this quote. I was, when I worked at the library, I worked here for several years when I was in high school, and I was an intern for a little bit as well. And I wanted to do some research on the Carnegie Library. So I went through the newspapers, we have the microfilm machine upstairs, and I found this quote here, and I read the entire article, and it was such a wonderful article, and just this quote, when I first read it, I'm like, how do we not know about this? How do we not know who this guy is? And the more I read about him, the more I was just baffled, like, how do we not know who Edwin Hillyer is? Because he's done so much for the city that he should be hailed as one of the great heroes of Waupun, the same way that Seymour Wilcox is, and that that Clarence Shaler is. At least that was how I felt, and that's how I continue to feel, and that's why I talk about him so much. Thank you for the question. Anyone else? All right, well then I'll turn it over to Tracy. I don't want to steal your thunder. I feel like I went a little bit long there.
Oh, no,
There you
I
go.
don't know that this is working now.
Oh, is it not? I might not have just been holding it closely. Has it been off the entire time? Could everyone hear me? Okay, good. That's good. I didn't even realize it was off.
Those of you who know me, I am not a very loud talker.